I'll bring us into the Estacada City Council meeting. If you'll please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Cindy, can I have roll call, please?
Counselor Dunsmere.
Present.
Counselor Gates. Counselor Hughes.
Here.
Counselor Lidkey.
Here.
Counselor Strobel.
Here.
Counselor Tenbush.
Here.
Mayor Drinkwine.
Here. Thank you very much. We are at the first citizen and community group comment. Have anybody in the hold?
Nope.
No.
Yeah.
Okay. We are now at the consent agenda. You've all had a chance to read over the consent agenda. Are there any questions or anything that we need to adjust? If not, can I have a motion on the floor?
I move to approve the consent agenda.
Okay, I have a first. Do I have a second?
Second.
A first and second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Motion passes. Thank you. All right, we are at department committee reports. Oh, wait, yeah, we're at department committee reports. We have Clackamas County. You've all had a chance to read over that. On their report, is there any questions to that report that you'd like to bring up at this time?
Mayor, can I just speak for a minute about that?
Yep, go ahead.
Okay, Chief Mendoza was going to be here tonight, but he's a little under the weather. And so just wanted to say regarding the data from those reports that he sent out, the January report and the annual report, that he is going over those and looking to compare the data from our city to other cities, as well as looking for trends or anything that might stand out that needs to be addressed. So he's working on that. He's also looking into the traffic stop data. He thought that it would be easier than it is, but it's actually a little more complicated. The state collects data. I don't know if it's data or data. I'm going to say it both ways the entire time. But the state collects that for the sheriff's office, and they provide an annual report. And so it wouldn't be specifically for Estacada, but he does have a meeting tomorrow at the sheriff's office to discuss that further. So we probably won't have an answer right away on that, but he is working on it. And we'll have a couple new deputies starting. Not sure which day it is in March, but they have their shift changes, and we'll have one deputy who he has, I believe, 20+ years of service, and he'll be coming out here, and another one who has 8 years of service and then of experience. And he also grew up in the area, and he's kind of, this second one has been waiting for an opportunity to come open in Estacada. So I think they're both really excited to work out here with us. And so that's kind of just a little update from that.
That's pretty exciting. It sounds like we're getting some seasoned officers. That's a pleasant idea. Joel, did you have a question?
I can get to unmute, sure. Quick question. Have we heard anything from a law enforcement side on the tree that was burned up there on First and good golly, what was the crossroad there? Right there by the funeral home. Yeah.
I have not heard about that, but I can ask about that, what the report turned out to be.
Yeah, I wasn't sure if that ever made it that far, or if it determined it was what it was. So
Okay, I'll look into that.
okay, thank you.
Sure.
All right, if there's no more questions, we'll move on to committee, commission, and liaison reports. So I will start off. Anybody just want to raise your hand and tell me if you have a report that you want to report on? Okay, I've got Katie so far. Anybody else have one that they've met with yet? No? Okay, Katie, go ahead.
The Parks and Recreation Committee met, I don't think it was last week, I think it was the week before. All my weeks are starting to blend together, I apologize. They are working right now on a springtime fun run type of fundraiser that's going to implement like a 5K run in with a smaller style fun run for the kids. The purpose of this is not only going to be a fun springtime activity put on by our Parks and Recreation, but is also going to serve as a fundraiser for the Wade Creek Phase 3 park, and which is going to be right in time for us to seize the opportunity given to us by the Ford family grant opportunity. Basically, they're going to be matching any donations or fundraising efforts by matching that donation. So we're going to essentially double our money by having this fundraiser and then getting the dollars matched in grant money. So really, really exciting work there. They've got a couple of other things, some smaller projects like parks and things that they are starting to also explore in different neighborhoods. And but really that springtime fun run is going to be right around the corner. I think they're talking about, I think, an April or a May fun run. So definitely look for some flyers coming out about that. And even if you don't have any intention of running during the event, because if you're anything like me, I don't run unless something is chasing me. But I do want to support the Wade Creek Phase 3 park. So I know that my family will be at least registering as participants so that our dollars can go toward the fundraising efforts. And I encourage everybody to at least explore that option, even if you don't have any intentions of running, just like me and my family. So really some exciting stuff coming out of Parks and Recreation, a really great group of people. That was my first meeting I got to attend with them, and they really are a great group of people who have some great energy and great ideas about how to enjoy the parks in Estacada and how to recreate around our great city. So really, really exciting stuff.
Great, thank you. School district have anything, Charity? Nothing on that end?
School district will meet on March 10th, I believe. So.
Okay, all right. And I have C4 that meets this Thursday, so I don't have anything right now. So I will move along. If nobody's got anything else to report on, let's go to our stand-in, Melanie. How are you?
All right. Yeah, I just have a couple things to add to that. First of all, I'm excited about that fun run. Whether I walk or run, definitely will be out there that day. Hopefully the weather will be great. The date is actually March 27th, so it's coming up very fast, and they're working on getting a way to register online. So that should be up and running in the next few days. But the fundraising is going well for Wade Creek Park 3 and that community building. Thank you to everybody who's contributed to that project, because we've had just a lot of people sending in, what they can do. It's been coming in $50, $150, $300, $500. And we just really appreciate that support. We do have a local person who's committing to a larger donation that will help us reach that, to max out the Ford Family Foundation dollar for dollar. He really wants us to reach that. So that's getting exciting, because I think we can finally see ourselves inching our way up that. If we had a thermometer, we'd be getting closer to the top. So that's very exciting. And we're starting to plan the grand opening, as long as it doesn't pour down rain for the entire month of March or something. And we should be on track to have that grand opening in July. So that'll be a lot of fun. Yeah. And then I just wanted to give a quick update about the water line repair that goes under the bridge. There's a water line, a lot of people might not be aware, but you probably know there's a water line that runs under the bridge and serves approximately, I think it's exactly 14 residences on the far side of the river. And it has sprung a leak. We are hoping it's just a gasket that'll be easy to fix, but because of its location, it's complex. And so probably what most people will notice is the traffic on the bridge it'll be down to one lane. While they're doing that, they'll bring it's like a bucket truck, but it goes up and over and then under the bridge so that people can make that repair. And hopefully it'll be quick. Where Chris is checking with the Oregon Health Authority to make sure that we follow all the guidelines when we turn the water back on, which means that we will have to turn the water off for those 14 households on the far side. So we definitely, once the contractor and the process is figured out how to do that, we'll want to get it done fast. So it should just take a day and a half is what we're hoping, barring any complications. But we'll keep you posted on that, and we're going to be notifying those people as soon as we have a timeline so that they'll be able to prepare to be without water for hopefully just a few hours. Yes, Councilor Litkey.
You may have just answered my question right there at the end. If it's only gonna be for a few hours, my question doesn't have merit, but you originally said a day and a half for that one. So if it's gonna be a longer term, do we plan as a city to provide them with like bottled drinking water or anything to give them something in the meantime? Or are we just gonna kind of like just tell them to kind of prep for it?
Yeah, we were talking about that today, whether we should provide some drinking water for them. It should just be a few hours, even though the bridge will be, the traffic will be metered across the bridge longer than that. The actual shut-off time should just be a few hours, unless it turns out to be something that's not expected. But yeah, we want to, if we can give them enough lead time, hopefully they can, store up some water, and so they'll be able to flush toilets and wash hands and things like that. And then I think that's a really great suggestion, to provide them with a case of drinking water or something. But it should just be a short-term, just a few hours, half a day. It could, but who knows? I can't promise that till we get going on it. So, but definitely we will be in communication with those people who use the water. So anyway, that's about all I have to share tonight, and excited to get on to Taylor's public hearing in a few minutes.
All right, well, thank you, Melanie.
Thank you.
I will now close the city council, and I will open the public hearing. Okay, I will now read from this. I will now close the council meeting and open the public hearing on annexation application 2022-01, annexing 34E/16/tax lot 1302. Do any members of the council wish to declare ex parte contact? I can't see the council, so you're gonna have to tell me, Melanie.
Okay, I don't see anybody raising hands.
Okay.
So, yeah, there we go.
All right, the council will now hear the staff report on the proposal. So Taylor, take it away.
All righty, thank you. Okay, so this is application file number 2022-01-annex. The application was originally scheduled for its first hearing with the Planning Commission on January 27th. We continued the hearing from that date. I don't think it was technically a table. I think it was a continuation of the hearing, because on that day we received comments from the Oregon Department of Aviation, and in the phone conversation that I had with their aviation planner, he indicated that there could be some legal liability for the city in the case that, in the case of like a crash involving nearby residential properties. And so that kind of sounded alarm bells for us. And we said, okay, we should definitely table that, make sure we gather as much information as the council is going to need to be able to feel confident in their decision on the application. Gave us enough time to get in touch with DLCD, our regional representative at the Department of Land Conservation and Development, and the city attorney, our planners at the county, and also more conversation with the Oregon Department of Aviation. So there's a lot of information included in this. It's a long presentation. There are page numbers or slide numbers in the bottom right-hand corner of the screen. If there is a specific slide that you know that you're going to want to go back to, try to take note of the number there. You can also just, pipe up and interrupt me if it seems like something that you don't want to try to remember until the end.
Taylor,
So,
Councilor Dunsmere has her hand raised.
Yeah.
Hi, I didn't want to interrupt you with, this early on, but I felt like this was a good opportunity. One of the things that came up during my review of the packet, and I know I talked with Melanie about this last Friday, and I was hoping to maybe talk with you about it before tonight's meeting, Taylor, but one of the things that came up is that in 2001, I guess a law was passed, that would be ORS 836.608, that directs local governments to adopt or develop an airport plan in their comprehensive plan. And I didn't see anyone for Estacada. Can you speak to that a little bit and let me know, even as you're going through this presentation, essentially why Estacada doesn't have compliance with ORS 836.608 and why it does or does not matter as it relates to this application, I guess is really what I'm hoping that you will address during the presentation today.
Yes, absolutely. I will speak to those questions as much as I can. The why is a little bit fuzzy for me. I've only been here for 3 years. There's a lot of things that it seems like we maybe should have done or updated that just haven't gotten to. But yes, I will definitely speak to that requirement and kind of where the city is at with that in relation to that, what we can do moving forward to come into compliance. Yes, absolutely. And how it relates to this application for sure. So good questions. Yeah, and I'll just jump right in. Okay, so the application is for an annexation and a zone change of 29995 Southeast Lawrence Road. It's a zone change from the airport plan designation. That's a designation on our comprehensive plan. So it's a comp plan map designation change from the airport designation to our low density residential designation. And then it's also a zone change from the county's rural residential zoning to the city's R1 low density residential zoning. We'll talk in a moment about how we don't actually have airport zoning to implement the comprehensive plan designation too. Okay, and let's see. So the applicant is Scott Clayton with Cedar Ridge Homes. He is not yet the owner of the property, and they can talk about this a little more if it's relevant, but I think they're in contract. And then the representative here with them tonight is Ray Moore with All County Surveyors and Planners. Also Tracy Brown assisting with the land use planning, and their I believe their attorney will also be here to talk about some of the legal aspects, and they did have some helpful extra information to share at the last hearing, so we can look forward to them answering some of our questions too. So here's the subject property. It is adjacent to the airport. It is not part of the airport property. It's outlined in blue on both of these maps here. On the aerial view, you can see where the runway is, and you can see homes over here right next to the runway. So it is also not, so it's not part of the airport property, and it's also not included in the established airport boundary. And that is an important distinction to make, because you can see here, everything in green is the established airport boundary. That boundary is established in the county's adopted airport plan. The county did comply with that section of ORS and adopted this plan. And so, that plan establishes this airport boundary. Everything within this boundary is governed by or subject to the county's airport overlay. Anyway, so as you can see, there are multiple properties within the boundary that are separate from the actual airport property itself. Still, the subject property that we're talking about tonight, which is circled in red, is not within the airport boundary, nor is it part of the airport property. Okay. So, even though it's not inside of the actual established airport boundary that is established in that state acknowledged county airport plan, strangely, the property was designated in our comprehensive plan map for airport uses, even though it's not part of the airport property. The city has no plans. We're not aware of any plans for this property to actually be used for airport purposes. And I think the applicant and maybe Tracy can speak to why it was probably designated that way back when. But anyway, I wanted to also call out, though, that this is not the only inconsistency between our comprehensive plan map designations and the adopted established airport boundary. There are a couple of other spots Yeah, so we have a bunch of low density residential designations on, let's see, at the bottom portion of the airport property itself, where I have these orange arrows. This actually at the very bottom of, this is kind of the end of the runway. This is actually still part of the airport property itself. So it's really strange that the actual airport property is split zoned and designates this area for residential uses for some reason. The blue arrow over here is also pointing to all of these properties along the side of the airport that are designated in our comp plan map for residential uses, even though they are within the airport boundary. And the green arrow is also pointing to another section that airport boundary, but designated on our comp plan map for residential uses. That's not making any comment or judgment about whether I or other staff thinks it should be designated for residential uses, just pointing out that it's an inconsistency here. Looking at the designation, what applies in that airport boundary, the county does have an airport overlay that applies only to everything within that established airport boundary, which, like I said, does not include the subject property. Even if the county's overlay did apply to the subject property, that overlay does not actually restrict development beyond whatever the federal regulations would restrict. So just noting that. And then talking about the comments that we received from the Oregon Department of Aviation. So correctly, they point out what you were referring to earlier, Councilor Dunsmuir, which is that the city was supposed to adopt comprehensive plan and land use regulations. So the comprehensive plan should have a chapter, or at least a section of our transportation chapter maybe, that is dedicated to airport planning related to this established public use airport. We would probably just call that the airport plan and adopt it into our comprehensive plan by reference. That plan would have policies related to, mitigating development around and in airports, or, mitigating impacts related to airports, considering safety, etc. And that's not something that the city did. As I was kind of mentioning earlier, I can't speak to why the city never did that. I have my own personal opinions about the way that state and local level bureaucracies interact and the kind of like accountability and follow-up when there's a state mandate, but it doesn't seem like there was any follow-up on that to make sure that local jurisdictions, especially small jurisdictions, actually followed through with those mandates. But I don't know. And it also might be the kind of thing where pretty much, up until I got hired as an on-staff planner, the city has always contracted its planning services out to the county. And so I think that maybe just resulted in like a lot of turnover between, and as much consistency in who is managing the planning services for the city. I don't know. So we can speculate on that, but regardless, the city has not yet satisfied that requirement. We never adopted, so we do have the airport designation on our comprehensive plan map. That's what the subject property is currently designated. The airport property is designated that, and then some of the other properties within the established airport boundary are designated that. I'll pause. Joel, you have a question, comment?
Quick question. Is the airport out there, is that a privately owned airport or is it publicly owned?
It is a privately owned public use airport, and that is key because being a public use airport means that it's subject to a certain set of standards according to the state and county requirements.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Yeah. So, yeah, so we do have the plan designation on our map. We don't have an airport plan adopted into our comprehensive plan as its own section. We do have a couple of policies in our or I think we have maybe only 2 policies in our comp plan that are actual policies anywhere related to airports, and then just a couple mentions here and there, but we really don't have an airport plan in our comp plan, which we are supposed to have. And then we certainly don't have a zone, an airport zone adopted to implement, via development code to implement that comp plan designation. So it is true, the city failed to meet that obligation, which is outlined in the section of ORS that Katie mentioned. That section of ORS relates directly to the Oregon Administrative Rule, section 660-013. However, nowhere in either of those rules do they specify any minimum development standards or restrictions on the types of uses allowed in, the vicinity of airports, in the transitional surfaces around airports, and the safety overlays that radiate out from an airport. And the fact that the city has not yet adopted airport policies and regulations does not, as far as we are able to tell from our conversations with the various state agencies, it does not preclude the applicant from annexing and zone changing to a zone that we actually do have implementing code for. So lacking any direction or indication from DLCD or OAR, ODA, neither of those state agencies have been able to point to a rule or a law that says the city is not allowed to approve this annexation and zone change because of, this section of OAR or this section of ORS. And so lacking that, the city is required to base our decision, your decision, on a land use application. You have to base it on the applicable approval criteria that are currently adopted into our code and comp plan. So one of the exhibits that was included in this application was the statement from the city attorney, which basically summarized what I just said. Neither of the state agencies are pointing to clear and objective standards that would give the city a legal basis for denying the application. Denial must be based on the applicable approval criteria. So, moving along to approval criteria, those approval criteria are our comprehensive plan, the applicable goals and policies in our comprehensive plan. It should be looking at our chapter on housing and our chapter or section of chapter on airports, but we don't really have that, but we'll talk about what we can find in there that might be applicable. And then the development code criteria for zone changes and annexations. So looking first at our comprehensive plan. Since we're looking at a proposal that involves residential lands, one of the applicable chapters of the comp plan, one of the goals that we're looking at is housing. Currently, the adopted findings in that chapter are from the 2019 preliminary or baseline county housing needs analysis. That analysis did find a need for all housing types in the 20-year period that it was reviewing. And so when we look at this zone change, it's proposing to bring in land that would otherwise remain zoned rural residential farm forest. And as it comes in, it gets rezoned to R1, low density residential. That zoning allows for a greater density than the current county zoning. And so it does serve the need for land that will allow all these different types of housing, single family, manufactured, accessory dwelling units, and duplexes or 2-unit like common wall dwellings could be allowed if they go through the conditional use process. All of those were indeed identified as going to be needed over the next 20 years. So that meets that satisfies that comp plan goal. Looking at airport considerations, what we do have in the comp plan are in Chapter 6. There are 2 policies in there related to airports. One basically just reiterates the federal prohibition on development within the airport clear zone. If any of you are familiar with the Cascadia Ridge Phase 5 subdivision, that is the subdivision that's just south of the airport property, and there's a big chunk, there's like a big empty tract that's kind of rectangular. I can pull it up on the screen if you're interested, but that was prohibited, that whole tract is prohibited from being developed because of this federal standard. And then the other policy in that chapter is policy 10, which is to adopt land use regulations as necessary to prevent noise sensitive development in airport related high noise areas. That's not something that the city ended up doing, but that is something that the city should do when it eventually, hopefully soon, goes through the process of adopting these comp plan and land use regulations into our plan and code. Katie?
Do we know who owns the airport?
I don't remember. I do have that information somewhere.
Have they been contacted specifically about tonight's meeting?
They received a notice of the application since they're a neighboring property owner. All of the properties that are within, I think it's 300, maybe it's 200 feet of the proposal received notice in the mail.
I'm just reading an ODA guideline document that actually says that any land use decisions, basically, if we have this land right now designated as airport in our comprehensive plan, and we are looking to designate it as a different zone, it looks like there's a procedure for that as outlined by the ODA that we're supposed to essentially give a written notice of the application specifically to the airport sponsor, which would be the owner of the airport. I just was wondering if the city has taken those steps to make sure that the airport owner specifically knew about today's meeting and whether or not if they are here and are willing to speak to us.
I don't know if so we are required to, so what you just read is the state's requirement for any land use application. We are required to notice those, everyone within that vicinity that I mentioned. I'm sorry, I don't remember how many feet. And so they definitely received notice from us, which satisfies that requirement. It's hard to know if they opened it or read it or cared about it if they did read it. We don't generally follow up on that type of thing unless we have heard, if we've heard from someone specifically interested in whether or not an application is coming in or something like that, then we'll try to keep them in mind, or we'll keep them on a list if we can, list of interested parties. But we didn't hear anything from them, so I'm not sure. So, okay, so those are the 2 policies related to airports in Chapter 6. And just noting sort of the response to policy 10 is, the intent of policy 10 is to prevent that kind of noise conflict that you're going to have. Yeah, Joel.
There's a question I was trying to clear up for myself here. So why is this particular property affected by the airport when the properties that are on like Current Creek Road aren't? Because according to why I keep finding it on the map, is that it's like south of where Current Creek properties are. What's the difference we have between those? And can you explain that to me real quick?
Yeah, that was our question for for ODA also, was it is confusing that ODA is taking issue with this particular property, which is farther away from the airport, farther away from the runway than other residential properties that have very recently been approved by the county, and the county has that adopted overlay. ODA blessed the adopted overlay, DLCD blessed the adopted overlay, right? You know, has approved residential development closer to this runway and other runways that are also in Clackamas County. And ODA has issued actually, you know, comments on those proposed developments that are closer to runways in other airports, saying we have no concerns about this proposed single family home that is 150 feet away from the Eagle Creek runway. I don't remember exactly which one. But yeah, that was our question too, for ODA, was why are you concerned about this particular property when all of these other properties are closer? They are zoned for low density residential or designated for low density residential in our comp plan. And they have been very recently approved for development, you know, and or are in the process of being developed. And the answer was basically to the effect of, well, we didn't hear about, we didn't hear about those things because they weren't zone changes, and so they heard about this because it goes to the state, because it's a comp plan map change, and or they also indicated that recently they have been focusing more strongly internally as a department, focusing more strongly on compliance with their guidelines, and so the wording was something like, even though we've allowed or not commented on residential development closer to runways in the past, doesn't mean it's a good idea to approve more residential development close to runways in the future. So that all might be something that the city agrees with and wants to prohibit development on properties that are this close to the airport, but we would just want to remind you that currently the approval criteria that apply to this application have to be adopted into our code and comp plan in order for the city to deny an application based on those concerns. If that makes sense. I hope I answered your question. This issue is kind of all over the place and it's easy to go on a tangent. Okay, so the other area in our comp plan that we do have a nod to airports is chapter 12, which is about urbanization, and just talks generally about the plan for growth management within our urban growth boundary. There's a little paragraph in that section that says basically that the city will adopt an airport zone to allow and regulate airport related development, but it didn't provide any timeline or, you know, specification on how and when the city was going to do that, and the city did not ever do that. So okay, moving on to the code criteria. The criteria for annexations are as follows. It has to be within the UGB, yes. It has to be contiguous to existing city limits. Yes, it is. It's that property's southern boundary is the northern boundary of Curran Creek Estates Phase 2, which was recently approved. Item C is that the proposed use must comply with the comprehensive plan. So this is looking back at the review of how does this use further the goals of the housing chapter and not harm the goals of the adopted or the airport plan. We don't have an airport plan. So that's kind of all we can really say is that it does meet the goals or intentions of the housing chapter of the comp plan. And lastly, the adequate capacity of urban services must exist or be made available. The applicants included a statement from the city engineer attesting to the capacity of sewer and water systems. And then thinking about transportation systems, whenever you have an annexation, the property owner is required to sign a waiver of remonstrance against the dedication of right-of-way upon the future development of the property. This annexation doesn't actually include any development, so that will happen in the future if approved. And then the zone change approval criteria is the last section of approval criteria that I'll review. Once again, kind of redundant, the request needs to be found consistent with the comprehensive plan. This one's also redundant. The adequate storm, sewer, and water services exist or can be provided. And then lastly, the transportation system is or will remain adequate with the zone change. This is where I think we had a question from one of you about the notice of incomplete application. This application came in, I think in September or October maybe of last year. And when we get a land use application, we review it for completeness. So it's basically just like a checklist. Does it have, did they submit this? Did they submit this? Did they submit this, right? And so in doing that completion review, we noticed, oh, well, a zone change application is supposed to provide a transportation traffic impact study, but this one didn't have one. So we went back to the applicants and said, you're going to have to do this. And they're going to have, if they move forward with the subdivision, they're going to have to do one anyway. So, we were thinking, well, they're going to have to do one anyway, so just go ahead and submit it now. Well, for the zone change, what that traffic impact analysis is looking at is the difference, is a comparison between what type and intensity and density of development can we anticipate with the uses that are allowed in that zone, and compare it with the type, intensity, and density of development that we can anticipate with the uses allowed in the proposed zone. If we don't have an adopted zone for the first part, they don't have anything to compare to. And so legally, the city probably doesn't want to try to require a traffic impact study between two zonings when we don't have adopted code for one of the zones. And the fact that also, if they're going to be coming in with a subdivision application after this annexation, they will be doing a traffic impact study anyway. And so it seemed reasonable to waive that requirement. They did at least submit a trip generation report or memo, kind of speaking to the anticipated impacts, but it would be unwise for the city to try to require that TIS when we don't have the code that they're trying to do the zone change from. So, okay. So I'm going to pause there. This is the end of the part of the presentation where I've reviewed the context of the application. I've reviewed the various approval criteria that we need to consider, which are in the comp plan chapters and the development code chapters. And I'm gonna then move on to explaining the very many exhibits that were included, and I'm sorry for that. I'm also frustrated by how many exhibits there are in this application. But before I do that, I just want to pause, see if anyone has questions. I see a hand, Jerry.
So just for my own information, what are the minimum lot sizes in R1?
7,500 square feet.
Okay. All right, I was just asked that question by somebody, so I answered it that way, but I just wanted to make sure I was accurate.
Yep, and I'll just add, some people get confused about, well, how come Campanella Estates and Faraday Hills were allowed to go below 7,500 square feet? They're both in the R1 zone. Those subdivisions were approved through the planned unit development process, which allows certain flexibility. And the subject property, let's see, actually maybe it is big enough to be a planned unit development. Anyway, either way, the council would be able to decide whether or not to allow going below that lot size. So, and Katie?
I guess mine is broken into two questions. My first question is, I guess, yes or no. Regardless of what we do with this application that we're looking at right now in front of us, we are obligated as a city to adopt an airport plan, and we are probably going to be looking at doing that in the immediate future, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Question number two. So I've always understood our options here at this table are to approve an application or deny an application. Is it a possibility for us as a council to table this discussion, not deny or approve, but to essentially table it until we can work on the city, until we can get the city in compliance and have an airport plan that we can then use to compare this application to what we adopt as our city's airport plan that we're supposed to have in place already? Is that an option to table this particular application?
I believe that it is. I was under the impression that the city, I'm going to stop sharing for a moment. I was under the impression that that this application was subject to the same requirement that, for example, a subdivision application is subject to, where the city has 120 days from deeming an application to complete. The city has to issue its final decision within that 120-day period. This application, however, is subject to review and acknowledgement by the state. The state has to approve or acknowledge the comp plan map amendment that is associated with an annexation, and also, of course, with the designation change. And there is a section in our code that says that that 120-day requirement does not apply for applications that are not solely under the city's purview. So I think that the answer to your question is that yes, you could do that. I can talk more maybe at the end of the rest of these slides about why, from staff's perspective, and I'm going to say, so staff being myself and our two county planners, and I guess the planning commission didn't really talk about tabling it, but they were prepared to recommend approval. But I'll talk about why I would not recommend doing that, but it will be, I think, up to the council if you guys wanted to do that. I think you are allowed to table it. So.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Okay, anything else before I move on? I'm gonna try to like zoom through the exhibits and just make sure that we hit all of the crucial information. And I'm gonna reshare. There we go. Okay, so exhibit 1 was the submitted application, which we just discussed how it does seem to meet the approval criteria that apply to it. So I won't go into any more details about that, but I just wanted to include on the screen their proposed potential future lot layout. So south of the property is Current Creek Estates Phase 2, and then over here to the west, of course, is the airport. There's about there's almost 400 feet, I think it was 390 feet, between the edge of the runway and the subject property for reference. Exhibit 2 shows that established airport boundary, which does not include the subject property, and which, as we saw earlier, our comp plan map does not seem to accurately reflect the established boundary that's in this airport plan. Exhibit 3 is section 713 of Clackamas County Zoning and Development Ordinance. This is that airport overlay, which applies only within the airport boundary. It does also describe a safety overlay whose boundary radiates outward from the airport. A clear definition of exactly where and how that boundary radiates outward was not provided. There's a lot of mapping, I think, that needs to go into defining that safety overlay boundary. ODA has offered absolutely to help us map that as we develop our airport plan and code. But neither ODA nor DLCD nor the county have an existing map. They have similar things in their airport plan where it'll say something like, it'll refer to maps that are supposed to exist, but then it seems like they never followed up and made the maps. Anyway, so we don't have a map of what that safety overlay looks like. And even if we did, the county's overlay still doesn't actually apply development restrictions or standards within its overlay or the safety overlay or the transitional surfaces that also come outward from the boundary. Exhibit 4 is the Clackamas County Airport Plan. This was adopted in 2001. It shows the Valley View Airport being a public use airport. On page 3, it explains the land use planning roles and responsibilities of ODA and the county and cities, which provides some context here for why ODA is submitting comments about a change to our comp plan map designations. It doesn't really explain why they've not submitted, not commented with their concerns about other residential development that's happened recently, much closer to the airport property, but provides a little bit of context there. Exhibit 5 is the comment document from ODA. It makes several points and then provides recommendations. I'm just gonna hopefully breeze through these points. So item 1 is just a summary of what the application is. Item 2 is, oh, sorry, this is really blurry, but I'll summarize it. So it identifies that the property does fall within that safety overlay zone that's defined in the county overlay, and this is true, but our response to that for the purpose of this application is that the city cannot enforce a county overlay, and even if we could, that overlay does not include any clear and objective standards or restrictions on development. Item 3 identifies that the city has failed to meet that statutory obligation to adopt comp plan and land use regulations that recognize the Valley View Airport. That is absolutely true. However, for the purpose of this application, again, the fact that the city has not yet adopted airport policies and regulations does not preclude the applicant from annexing and zone changing to a zoning that we actually have code for. Yeah, and then just once again, if the proposal meets all of the approval criteria, the city has no legal basis for denial. Item 4 refers to the Airport Land Use Compatibility Guidebook. This is a document developed by ODA and DLCD intended to guide jurisdictions in developing those plan policies and land use regulations. It is not a legally binding document. It also does not establish standards. It's basically just a book of advice. I expect that the city will refer to this when we do go through that process of developing our comp plan and code sections related to airports. And so, yeah, he's calling out that the guidebook does identify residential uses as being incompatible with airports. But once again, the city and county have both approved residential development closer to this airport than, and even within the established airport boundary. And yeah, so basically neither the city, the county, nor the state can identify any adopted standard or criteria that would defend the city's denial of the annexation and zone change here. I think I see a hand. Joel?
Would it be something that we could do where we might approve it with conditions, and the conditions are that it meets the future development, what brings us into compliance with that comprehensive plan? So we approve it with conditions that it meets the comprehensive plan that we have to develop in order to be in compliance. Would that be something we can do, or would that be, an odd way to take that?
Yeah, it would be. I think we would not be able to do that. The zoning, whatever zoning we apply, basically, if we're annexing property, we have to apply zoning to that property, and that zoning must have clear and objective standards for whatever type of development would be allowed in that zone. So maybe the applicant's attorney can speak a little bit more than to this issue, but I don't think that we could annex a property and basically just like spot zone it with whatever standards we decided made sense at the time. I think there's probably some legal reasons why we're not allowed to do that, basically. The other thing maybe related to that is that it was mentioned in the comments from our DLCD regional rep. Maybe this is in the next section, I'm not sure. No, it's not. We had talked with our DLCD regional rep and our county planners about the possibility of applying one of the county's zones to the property, and we've heard that that's something that other jurisdictions have done. Happy Valley, for example, has a mechanism in their code where they can basically apply, upon annexation, they can apply whatever the county's most closely related zone is until they adopt their own zoning. And I don't know if you're all familiar with the Happy Valley and Damascus situation, but basically Happy Valley now has a bunch of area within areas that are coming into their city limits that don't yet have a comprehensive plan designation yet, or that have comp plan designations, but the designations don't have zoning. So kind of like this issue, they have a mechanism in their code where they can adopt the county's most closely related zone upon annexation. We don't have that mechanism in our code. So if that kind of speaks a little bit to what I agree would be a good idea, but we don't seem to have that possibility. Katie?
I just want to point out, not necessarily to you, Taylor, but I guess everybody else that I serve on this council with, this last paragraph on this slide that we're looking at right now, I think is really what's most concerning to me, that the subject property appears to be within the transitional surface of the Valley View Airport per ZDO 713. As the future requested zoning of the subject property appears to allow residential uses, the ODA identifies the proposal as depicted in annexation application, this one, to be in non-conformance with the above referenced standard provided in the airport land use compatibility guidebook. I guess that's what really concerns me right now. Just the fact that if we were to annex this property in today, and then we go and we do an airport plan and we get everybody involved that needs to be involved, and we start hearing from the person who actually owns the airport and they start chiming in also, you know, airports and residential uses, airports affect residents just as much as residents affect airports. And I guess this is just really concerning to me that we're going to be making a decision that has a potential of kind of having a backlash at some point later down the road, if that makes any sense. I don't know how other people are feeling about this, but that last paragraph on this slide is really concerning to me.
Yeah, the only thing I'll say about that is that the wording here would imply that the land use compatibility guidebook has regulatory authority, and it does not. So we would be doing something that is in non-conformance with the advised standard. The above reference standard that they're talking about here comes out of the model code for airports that's provided in that guidebook. Other jurisdictions have taken that code. Sorry, I don't remember which one he was showing me in one of our calls, but other jurisdictions have taken that code and mimicked it in their adoption processes. And actually the last one that he showed me had this particular section crossed out because I think that jurisdiction and other jurisdictions, if I'm understanding the county planners correctly, have had a hard time redesignating or restricting residential development according to this guidebook because of issues like something being a takings and yeah, other, you know, local preferences and considerations. So I saw another hand, Joel.
So if I get what Katie's saying, and if we hadn't approved a large subdivision just north of this one that's going to have, you know, 75, I think 80 houses in it or something, then what she said would make better sense to me. I think the position we're in now is they meet all the criteria that we currently have for the city guidelines. Just from my analysis of it, I think it's something where we just need to approve it and consider it grandfathered in when and then work immediately as fast as possible on getting this airport, the airport piece into our comprehensive plan, and then use that for future approvals and annexations. But I think the condition we're in is just, I mean, it's not going to be posing a bigger threat or issue than any of the other 80 houses that are between the airport and it. So us to take this much consideration on a single place seems like it might be overkill when it's already meeting what we need to by our and potential that it's more likely we're going to have a problem from LUBA if we deny it or put it off than we are if we were to approve it, grandfathered in, and then use the comprehensive plan going forward for any future annexations in this area. That's just my take on it.
Okay, I'm gonna.
Taylor. So if we approve this, if we go ahead and approve this, is there any jeopardy of it getting kicked back by county? Because after it leaves us, it still has to go back through county, right? So
the county doesn't have to approve anything related to this application. With any annexation or zone comprehensive plan map change, the state always has to acknowledge that change.
okay, now is there any jeopardy of us approving this and then the state coming back and saying, no, you're not in compliance, you can't do this?
There's always jeopardy of that. It would be very frustrating for that to happen because we engaged them early on as I mean, with with this kind of application that has to be acknowledged by the state, they receive notice of it at least 35 days before the first scheduled public hearing. So DLCD has known about this application since whenever that was in December. ODA got word of the application through DLCD, and that's when we all were engaging about it. And throughout those multiple conversations that we've had, both with DLCD and with ODA, neither of those agencies have pointed to the section of state law that would prohibit the city from approving this application, or that would support the city's denial of the application. And so for them to not point to anything, we explicitly asked for those sections, right? And neither agency provided that, and just both of them encouraged us to, whenever possible, comply with the airport planning mandate, which we can absolutely do, but that's a separate project. Anyway, so for them to not provide those sections of law and then come back after the hearings are done and say, oh, actually, here are the sections of law and we're going to appeal based on that, that would be very frustrating, but I guess it's possible. I see a couple hands. Joel?
I think Katie was actually before me, but I just have a quick question to follow on to Jerry. And that was, if we approved it and it goes up to the state and they kick it back, would that make them liable for LUBA, not us, because we approved it and it's the state rejecting it? Would the petitioner have to take it to LUBA through the state at that point?
I would, gosh, yeah, I don't know. I would think it would become a state case at that point because the city attempted to approve it based on the approval criteria. But I don't know if it would it be a case between the city and the state, or would it be a case between the state and the applicant? I don't know.
Yeah, if it's between the applicant and the state. So basically, I'm looking here as liability on the city at this point. If we approve it under our criteria and we push it out and the state rejects it, the applicant, I'm wondering if the applicant would then have to take the case to the state, and that would remove the city from liability, and we've done our part that we should
I see what
be.
you're saying.
Yeah, and that's what I'm kind of curious on that as well.
Yeah, so the burden would be on the applicant at that point to go through the appeals process. But then, yes, I think it would be between the applicant and the state at that point. And Katie.
So I'm looking at an email that you exchanged with DLCD that was dated February 2nd. Just this one paragraph point that sticks out. The comments from ODA indicate otherwise. And in the call the morning of January 27th, their aviation planner told me that if the city approves the rezone to residential, despite ODA's comments, the city could be liable in the event of an accident involving aircraft and neighboring residences. What did our city attorney ultimately end up saying about the city's liability if we go ahead and approve this application and rezone it to residential? And then if there was, in the event, unlikely, but still possible, there was an accident involving an aircraft and a residential neighborhood, what would the city's liability be at that point?
Yeah, so he couldn't speak definitively to that. It's hard to say what a person would be able to, what kind of claim a person would be able to make. But it sounds like in cases of airports and development around airports, or development that's potentially in flight paths, the onus is more on, or the liability is more on the actual builder or developer, and not on the governing jurisdiction. The builder or the developer is the person who is the entity who is required by federal aviation law to submit notice of the development plans and make sure that it complies with all of those minimum requirements. The fact that there are no like clear adopted standards or restrictions related to development around airports, either at the state level or at the federal level. What they do have is that that area at the end of the runway, I forget what it's called, airport clear zone or something like that. That is a clear federal restriction on development. It gives you the, you know, the 1:20 ratio of how the height needs to be restricted and
Yeah.
stuff like that.
Yeah, because you know, I'm not a planner. And so the research that I did, you know, really over the last couple of days is not anywhere close to a knowledge base that's going to be able to make a decision, really. But at the same time, what I can tell is a lot of the regulations that are out there, whether they've been adopted or they've been recommended or they're just guidebooks or whatnot, really all sort of focus around the runway itself, not the airport property, but the runway itself. And I think that might be one of the reasons why, you know, the ODA or the DLCD is really focused on this particular property, is because of its proximity to the end of the runway. That's just from what I can tell about it. And honestly, that liability that the city could be taking on by making a decision about this property without having an airport plan, again, goes back to the concern. So so we didn't get any clear direction from our city attorney about whether or not the city would be assuming liability by going against ODA recommendation.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'll just remind that the property is also not even really, you know, this area down here, if you can see my cursor, this is that tract I was talking about that is, you know, development is prohibited according to the federal regulations for, you know, airport approach areas or runway approach areas. So all of this is part of the runway approach. The subject property is over here to the east, and, you know, it is close in distance somewhat to the runway. It's almost 400 feet away. It is farther than the properties over here, but still it's on the sides of so it's not, it's just it's strange. It's just a different you know, you're not having planes come in from the east or west, you're having planes come in from the south. So anyway, and another hand, Joel.
Maybe it's just me and I'm confused because I think you're showing two different properties here. Because the property you're showing is to the right of the runway, but the property I keep seeing on everything else is south of the airport quite a bit. It's not even close to the runway. Because it's on Independence, is according to the application, which is quite a bit south of it.
Oh no.
Oh, that's the other annexation. I think you might have clicked on the wrong,
Oh yeah, that's the resolution. That
yeah,
was
the resolution.
the last
Oh.
hearing's annexation. Okay.
So scroll down a little bit in your packet and you'll get.
Oh, I see. I did that. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, that's confusing. There you go.
Thank you.
Okay, good.
That makes some of my other questions null and void. So.
Okay. Okay, so let's get back to where we were here. Okay, item 5 is of the ODA comments. This is reiterating the requirement that the city adopts comp plan and land use regulations. We can absolutely do this. That process is separate from this application, though. Item 6 basically just explains that that airport will be a public use airport, is guaranteed to remain public use at least until 2036. Just for your information. Item 7 is their list of recommendations. So the first two are encouraging us to update our comp plan, recognize the airport, adopt code accordingly. Recommendation 3 discourages residential use within the transitional surface of the airport. It does not, they were not able to provide, like I said, like a map or like a number of feet from the runway that transitional surface applies in. And so that's something that It seems like the expectation is for the city to do that analysis, do that mapping, right, ourselves, and develop policies and definitions accordingly. But yeah, they don't have a map or a clear calculation that they were able to provide for us for where that transitional surface actually is on the subject property. And then recommendation 4 requests that the city give ODA notice of any land use applications in the city. We can do that easily. We will just go ahead and start doing that. That's not related to the approval of this application. Okay, Exhibit 6 is a letter from the applicant's attorney. He's here tonight. I'll let them speak to any of this if they wish, but just in case I've left anything out. But like I said, it seems like the county planners, staff, DLCD, the city attorney, and the applicant's attorney all arrive at a similar conclusion related to what the city can and can't do and what the state's requirements are. And then Exhibit 7 is an email thread with DLCD and ODA. This is documenting that no safety overlay zone has actually been mapped, no clear standards or restrictions required by the state have been identified. Exhibit 8, sorry, this is redundant, but it just clarifies that yes, the city has to adopt code and comp plan policies, etc. Exhibit 9 is the federal definition of these various surfaces with a diagram. Exhibit 10 is that model code from the guidebook that ODA was referencing. Exhibit 11 is a planning template for public use airports. This is also provided by ODA to help local jurisdictions adopt their comp plan and land use regulations. Once again, that's a separate project. Exhibit 12 is the Valley View Airport Service Agreement, which requires the airport to remain public use until 2036. And Exhibit 13 is the statement from our city attorney, which says, again, the state is not pointing to any clear and objective standards that prevent residential development in proximity to the airport. They have not objected to residential use previously. This development is consistent with the development that's occurred in closer proximity to the airport, and that it's probably more likely a legal risk for the city to disallow residential designation rather than allowing it, as it looks like selective enforcement, and we would have to point to the criteria that would be the basis for that denial. Exhibit 14 is an email from Glenn Hamburg on February 15th, which was discussing a number of things. Discussing how the city has no mechanism in our code. Oh, I'm sorry, I wasn't looking at the screen. Joel, you had a question?
Yeah, just a quick question. What would be do you think that is your best guess development time to put together the airport comprehensive plan? What kind of timing would that take?
Yeah, so there would be some research involved, looking at what other jurisdictions do, figuring out what the state's, getting some clear guidance from the state, various state agencies on that, doing like having a workshop and collecting outreach from residents in the area, at least one workshop with the council, if not two, depending on how in-depth it needed to go, and then just drafting up the report. The report needs to justify the adoption of these policies and code amendments according to like the state's requirements for comp plan amendments and development code policies, and then having the actual adoption hearings. So it feels like it shouldn't be that much work, but probably realistically, it would be maybe like an 8 or 9 month process. That's a guess. There's a question mark there. I'm not totally sure. And you never know like what issues are going to come up during that outreach and during that research. So it is hard to say.
So it sounds like an extended period of time. So, all right. Thank you.
If there were more of me, I think it would be probably shorter too. So, okay, so this email from Glenn, yeah, talking about how we don't have a mechanism in our code to just apply county zoning. We talked about how the transitional surface does overlay the subject property, but reminding that there are not actually development restrictions within that transitional surface. It calls out that DLCD and ODA have not opposed annexations, land divisions, and residential development within this particular airport's transitional service, even closer to the runway, despite getting notice of those applications. It provides the attachments that are in exhibits 15 through 17. Those show that ODA expressly did not object to a 3-story residential development within 150 feet of the Eagles Nest Airport runway, which runs contrary to these concerns about the subject property, which is, he says, 3 times farther from the Valley View runway. I think it's a little under that, but still it's much farther than 150 feet. And then lastly, it asked once again for which ORS or OAR section states that the subject property can't be rezoned for residential use by the city, despite it's not in an airport zone, it's not subject to any county height restrictions on development. So just asking for them once again to point to the section that establishes clearly that the city what the city is or is not allowed to do in relation to this application. So, and we did not get those answers. And then the last exhibit, 19, is a sketch submitted by the applicant that just shows basically how the transitional surface interacts with the subject property. Yeah, so they also have 390 feet. So I think we've got 390 feet between the edge of the runway, which is probably not the edge of the pavement, I'm not sure. But anyway, almost 400 feet between the runway and the property. And that transitional surface has a slope of, I think, 7 to 1. And so they calculated what that slope will look like. And when it reaches the western edge of the property, the transitional surface height would begin at 55 feet above ground level. And the whereas the maximum allowable building height in that zone is 35 feet. So you're looking at least a 20-foot difference. I'm not sure what the topography looks like there, so that's something that would have to go into consideration. But yeah, either way, once again, they've had no issues with other residential development, the homes over here that are closer to this property. So taking all that into consideration, so the Planning Commission agreed that the request seems to meet all of the applicable criteria. It just has your standard annexation approval criteria here. And then I think I included my notes. Yeah, so we received some questions from a couple of you. Thank you, Melanie, for passing these along to me. So I just wanted to reiterate, I think we resolved why there was a notice of incomplete application. Why is the city not in compliance with a requirement to have an airport plan? It's a little complicated, but basically we aren't, but we should be. And maybe I'll comment on this one again. How can we approve this when we don't have an airport plan? I think the argument would be that, or the consideration is that the responsibility to adopt that airport plan and related policies and regulations, that's the city's responsibility and not the applicant's. And so I don't know what what legal recourse the applicant would have if the city were to table this application for a certain amount of time and make the applicant wait for that amount of time. Sort of, I don't know, it might be an undue burden for the owner or the applicant who are trying to either sell or develop their property. And they feel like, well, the city had an obligation to adopt zoning for all of the area that's within its UGB. The city failed to do that, not myself, just this property owner trying to annex my property. So there could be some legal risk there for that reason too. And then that kind of relates to what I promised to get back to, which is why staff and the county's recommendation would not be to table it, because yes, it could create that undue burden that I think there might be some legal liability there for the city, but also to consider the likelihood that the adoption of that airport plan and the adoption of the airport zoning code, how likely is it that there will actually be standards and restrictions, restrictions on development within that zone that are not already established at the federal level? The state nor the county, neither the state nor the county have actually have restrictions in their related to airport developments or related to residential development around airports that are adopted. There is that one section of the model code that says, residential uses are not compatible with airports, but again, that's a piece of advice and it's not an adopted code. And it sounds like jurisdictions have not chosen to adopt that section of the model code if they are using the model code because there are those issues of like takings problems. So yeah, anyway, that's my jarbled thoughts on that. And then, yeah, talking about the kind of time frame of that project for complying with that ORS. I feel like 9 months is a reasonable time frame, but I thought this application was going to be quick and easy, and boy, it sure wasn't. So no promises there. And then lastly, was there any pushback from people about this application? No, we didn't have any pushback other than the comments from ODA. So, okay, that is the end of my presentation. Any more questions?
Okay, any more questions for Taylor before we move along here? No? All right. Is there any correspondence regarding this application, Taylor? Before I read the next part? No? Okay. I will now read a statement about evidence presented at the hearing. An issue which may be the basis for an appeal to LUBA must be raised prior to the close of record at the final eventuary hearing on the specific application. Such issue shall be raised with sufficient specificity so as to afford LUBA and the parties an adequate opportunity to respond to each issue. Failure of an issue to be raised at the hearing or in person by letter, or failure to provide sufficient specificity to afford LUBA and the parties an adequate opportunity to respond to the issue precludes appeal to LUBA on that issue. Would the applicant please come up to the microphone? So do we have the applicant here?
Yes.
All right.
So Taylor, I'm bringing in Scott and Tracy and Garrett. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right.
I see Scott on there.
I didn't know if Ray
also-
was going to be with them, but
I don't see Ray here. But I do see a hand raised from Lynn. I'm not sure if that's somebody I need to be bringing in as
I'm
well.
not familiar with that name. So
Okay.
after
Okay, so we got. All right.
Good evening. Can you hear me just before I get
Yes, we
started?
can.
Okay, yeah. My name is Tracy Brown, and I'm a land use planning consultant. And Ray Moore won't be here tonight, so I'll be kind of stepping in for him. Yeah, I was brought into this project when after the application was deemed incomplete, and I was the one that wrote the supplemental narrative to address the comprehensive plan goals and policies to make sure the application complied with those goals and policies. Tonight you have before you, as Taylor went through, kind of a straightforward application with a twist, we'll call it. I guess the twist I would say is regarding the airport comprehensive plan designation. The question we can ask is, why do we think the property was designated the airport designation to begin with? And I have a answer, although I'm speculating, but I think it's a logical answer. And Taylor, if you wouldn't mind sharing slide 5, that'd help me illustrate.
Yeah, one moment here.
Thank you.
There we go.
So yeah, as this slide shows, the property on the right side is the properties designated as part of the airport by the county. And on the left side is the city's comprehensive plan designation of AP, which is in the light blue. So when the comprehensive plan was adopted in 1980, the property in question was part of a larger property of about 50 acres. And that property essentially is an L shape, including this property. And if you went straight across the southern boundary of this property and then included that property that shows the little drainage through it, included that property, which is about 37 acres. So in 1990, this property was partitioned to create parcel 1, which is 12.89 acres, and that's the subject property, and the rest of it a little over 37 acres. So my sense of this is the reason this was designated as AP, not because it was necessarily affected by the airport, but because it was connected to a property that essentially contains the primary runway for the airport. And I've run into this case in other situations in other cities as a private consultant, where when they did the mapping for this, they kind of looked at, hey, what properties made sense, and they just included that whole property. It was probably a single tax lot at that time. So instead of creating a separate plan designation for that, we'll call it the appendage of this property, they just included it all at that time. So I would offer that as an explanation as to why this property was given the AP designation to begin with. And the next question I would probably pose to you is, would adoption of an airport plan, if it were adopted, make a difference to this property? And my sense is, because of the location of this property being to the side of the runway, it probably wouldn't make any difference if you had an airport plan or you adopted an airport plan in the near future. Taylor, if you wouldn't mind just going to slide 29, I can kind of illustrate that a little bit more. And you went through that slide a little bit ago, and that shows the transitional surface. That is one of the items that is typically mapped and identified as a ODA, identified that as a concern. So as this shows, the property, although it would be affected by the transitional surface, effectively it wouldn't impact the property because it is above the ground level of the property. And at the western side of the property, it's 55 feet above. And generally, I believe this property is generally flat. And so that line will continue to go up in the air over the property. So the applicant doesn't have a problem, building under that area. And as Taylor mentioned, city code allows residential dwellings up to 35 feet anyway. So I guess with that, we feel that it meets the applicable code and criteria in the annexation ordinance. And, we respectfully request that you approve this. I would like to hand it over now to Garrett Stevenson, the applicant's attorney, to talk about some of the legal issues. You can probably take off that slide also, Taylor. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Tracy, and good evening. Garrett Stevenson. I'm a land use attorney for Schwab, Williamson and Wyatt, representing the applicant. And before I get started, I'm gonna give the mic to Councilor Dunsmuir. I know she's got her hand up, so have at it.
I appreciate that. Actually, my question was more related to what Tracy was talking about with the last slide. So I understand that the development, the planned development is happening above the runway. Again, in my very limited amount of free time, I've tried to do some research about, other airport plan codes and recommendations and things. One of the things that comes up as a regular concern is lighting. Can you speak to us about how the potential increase in lighting is essentially expected to affect or not affect the runway at all? When you get more houses in a closer space, you're going to have more lights shining brighter, and especially if the lights are above where the runway is, those lights have a potential of shining down onto the runway and affecting the airport traffic that way. Can you speak as the land use planner to how the topography may affect it, or if it's expected to increase the lighting, decrease the lighting, or anything that has anything to do with that? I would just really love to know what your opinion is on it.
Yeah, I guess what I would say is that the property isn't necessarily significantly above the runway. It's that transitional surface that projects above the runway. So, the property in question, it would have typical residential lighting, which would be, your porch light and things like that. Knowing Scott's, dwelling style, I mean, often those lights are under the a covered porch and things like that. So some of that lighting would be shielded. So, I don't know if there would be much, there may be street lights and things like that, but it shouldn't be significantly impact the visibility and usability of the runway itself. I'm not sure how much use the runway gets at night. I'm not that familiar with it, but I know it needs to meet FAA requirements in terms of lighting of the runway itself and morning lights and things like that. But I don't think that should be a concern.
Councilor Dunsmuir, to that point, I maybe just want to back up just a second to talk about some of the concerns I've heard tonight about compliance with ODA and FAA regulations. And I can't claim to have an expertise in every single area of land use law, but one of the serendipitous things about this project is that in my practice, I do a lot of work with power companies building transmission lines and public utilities. And so in that capacity, I've had to learn a thing or two about how to meet FAA requirements because, as you can imagine, power lines and airports don't often mix. And I got to tell you, transmission lines and even distribution lines are substantially taller than a single family dwelling. The single family dwellings are about as short as you really get in terms of your typical land use type. But by way of example, it might help the council if I explain how this stuff is usually handled. And I can't claim that it would be handled the same way here, but this is typically what I've seen. So first, before jumping into that, I want to point out some factual inaccuracies with ODA's letter. First of all, they said that we are in this transition zone. Everything's in the transition zone. If that transition zone extends out almost without end, and as it goes out, it gets higher and higher and higher. In this case, the product that we would be constructing is substantially lower than where the transition zone exists up in space. And I think that's kind of a hard thing to wrap your mind around. When I first started having to look at this years ago, I remember having to go march down to the city of Portland and ask for their conical zone map, which is in this giant vellum book that looks like it was from the Middle Ages. But that's basically what they're talking about there. And that's one of a number of different conical zones that come into play when you're doing work around airports. And the primary one, though, that actually has some regulatory teeth to it is a conical zone that requires you to give notice to FAA or to ODA. And in the case of ODA, the notice would go directly to FAA. And you have to provide that notice if you're building something that is effectively within this conical zone. And my guess is pretty much everything in Estacada is within that conical zone. It's a very, in this case, this airport is just over the length that triggers the most restrictive conical zone. And what does that mean? Well, it means you go on the FAA's website, and FAA has a great tool that you use to submit what your project is, and they will tell you whether they actually need notice of it, although arguably they've already gotten it. And then 9 times out of 10, they say it's fine. I did a project where we were running a transmission line right next to the approach and landing area of an airport. We had poles that were up there around 75 feet tall. We had a little distance, but that was right where an airplane would be going in on slide path. We notified FAA and they said it was fine. Again, I can't guarantee that would happen here, but I don't have any reason to believe that FAA in particular would have any issue with a residential development here. The other thing is that, okay, let's play that out. Let's say FAA does want notice and they say, well, here's our concerns. And what they would ask you to do if they did have concerns about being within, hazard to air navigation is what they would call it. If they had concerns, they may ask you to put up some red lights. And the way I've seen this in a lot of subdivisions that are near airports is you put a little red light on top of the street lights. Typically, FAA and ODA, as a practical matter, and putting aside what the ODA's land use planner did, the aviation folks, they don't have a problem with lights on houses, because what that does is it tells the pilot that this is not where you want to land. What the pilot is looking for is a big dark space kind of outline in the rest of the city with some very specific lighting running down the middle of it. Where there are things that are not adequately lit by the typical light in a neighborhood or in a city, that's where you have to put on the red lights and so forth. There was a question about tort liability that the ODA planner raised. Again, I don't think that ODA's comments on that were factually accurate, and that's to be expected because they weren't written by an attorney. But in the case of liability for not, let's say, for example, we don't notice FAA and we do, and they say put the little red lights up and we don't do that. Well, what happens if a plane comes down and smashes into a house and kills the pilot, kills the people in the house? That case has never actually been litigated as to what, maybe it's been litigated, but it's never been reported as to what the liability is of the owner of that property or the developer of the subdivision for not putting the light on there. But one thing I can tell you is that the one case that was reported on this did not insinuate that the local government would be liable at all. It was a tort claim. In this case, it was a power company. It was a tort claim against the power company for stringing a big transmission line across a canyon. They didn't put if you've ever seen those lines across big canyons, they usually have the balls, they'll be blue or orange or whatever. And they said, you need to put the balls up. They didn't. And so it was a question for the jury whether or not the power company who owned the line would have some degree of liability to the helicopter that ran in, the owner of the helicopter or the decedent's family for not making it apparent the pilot. I cannot think of a single reason. Apparently, when it was raised with your city attorney, neither could they. I cannot imagine a basis where the city itself would be liable for that. And there's a bunch of protections in Oregon state law that prohibit liability against cities for making land use decisions. I don't think those are even need to come into play here because, again, the responsibility is not on the city to handle any lighting or signage to maintain the safety of air travel. It's the obligation of the owner of the property and the developer of the property. And so what would most likely happen here is that you don't have a subdivision application before you, but at a certain point you will. And what would happen presumably, and this is something that I've discussed somewhat offline with Taylor, is that we would give FAA notice and give them a copy of the subdivision and so forth. And presumably they would tell us whether or not we need to put up any signage. So that's kind of how FAA and ODA's regulatory authority works. Their land use authority is extraordinarily limited. I mean, I understand, I mean, frankly, I think that the letter from ODA was a bit haughty, and I think that it really played up the function that ODA plays in land use matters, which is pretty minimal. And the real function of ODA is to maintain the safety of air travel. It's not to dictate to local governments how to do land use planning. And if you look at DLCD's comments, there's a pretty good discussion. And I think that the folks at DLCD really boiled the ocean to find a reason why this city should not approve this. And they said they couldn't. They said that there's no basis in adopted plan or law that suggests the city should not approve this application. That's not to diminish ODA's concerns, but ODA does not make land use policy in Oregon. LCDC does, and the cities do. And it seems to me that, however, surprising that letter was, it seems to me there might be a different change in tone at with ODA and their staff, and that they want to become more involved in these decisions, and that's fine. But at the end of the day, what's the regulatory framework we're dealing with? Well, we're dealing with the regulations we have in place now, which leads me to my second point, which is why this council really should not just basically put this on the back burner and wait until it has a new code provision and a new airport plan adopted. And that's simply because under Oregon law, an application in most respects is subject to the law that was in place on the date that it was subject to the law on the date that it was submitted. And so it may be that we can't necessarily sue the city, not that we'd ever want to, for not making a decision, but even if it put this on hold, the decision itself would be subject to the original plan and code that was in effect when it was applied for. And that's, I think, a really good practical reason why the city ought not just simply wait for the other neighborhood plan piece to come into it. Second, other really practical reason is that I cannot imagine a scenario where this particular piece of land would be included as an airport parcel, for the simple reason it's never been developed for airport uses. It's not within the it's not within the line of the runway. So you're not going to have airplanes literally landing over and taking off over these homes. It's off to the side, like a lot of other lands that are there that are zoned for other things. And so I used to be a land use planner back in the day, and putting my land use planner hat back on, I'm not sure what the city would have to gain by including this in a future airport master plan, particularly because from what I can tell, this particular property is not subject to the county's airport plan anyway. It's close to it, but it's not. So that's a practical reason why I think we ought not just sort of wait for that other process. And the third reason is I think that process is going to last a lot longer than 9 months. It takes a long time, especially, lately with, everything ever since COVID started seems to be stuck in the mud. And my guess is it's going to be substantially longer than 9 months. And Frank, speaking for my client, I don't know that that's terribly fair to them to have to wait that long, given the fact that it's highly unlikely as a planning proposition that this land would ever be included as a portion of the airport. And if it has always been available in theory for airport uses, it's never been developed for that in more than 30 years. And so I just don't think it's realistic to see that development happen for airport uses anytime in the foreseeable future. But you've got your hand raised, Commissioner Dunsmuir, again. Go for it.
Wanted to pick your brain as a land use attorney. Is it in the city's best interest to keep a second easement that would provide an alternate route out or route into an airport as part of the airport plan? I guess I'm only asking that because that would be the only benefit that I could see as a city to keeping this particular property as part of the airport. That it looks like Southeast Lawrence Road there's an easement that goes right along the north side of this subject property that leads from Lawrence Road as it runs north and south, actually going into the airport at the top of that property. Am I looking at the map correctly?
No,
Taylor?
Lawrence
can't-
Road actually turns left right there at that property. That property's on the corner. Lawrence Road actually follows that property line. It goes,
Yeah.
it goes north and then it turns west on that property line.
Okay. And so then that's what goes into the airport as like a second way in or out. And how will that, how will Lawrence Road then be affected by the future development?
If we could, Taylor, I don't know, can you bring up, I don't know if we can do this in our current Zoom situation, but could we bring up a map?
There we go.
Thank you. And I apologize, I'm not super familiar with the geography out here, but from what I'm seeing, there's a number of ways in and out of the airport. Particularly one up to the north of the property that apparently stubs right there. And then I don't know what we've got, Taylor, farther north of that. It looks like there's already a stub street down in the existing subdivision to the southeast. But what I would say is that I think that if there is emergency access that's necessary for that airport, the time to really plan for that is when we come in for a subdivision application, we're laying out the streets. I mean, I can't speak for my client on this particular issue, but I'm sure it's something that we would, if the city were interested in that at some point when we're laying this subdivision out, it's something we could definitely talk about. So yeah, it looks like there's a stub right above us, Southeast Lawrence Road, and then the standard entrances to the airport at the north. And I think that there is also one to the west. But Taylor, if you want to chime in here, this is your city. What do you think?
Well, first I'll see if Joel wanted to comment or had a question, and then I'll.
Looking at for Council Dunsmuir's question there, it looks like this property is not specifically gonna, like Lawrence Road goes on and past this property, so I don't think this property would specifically be affected by an evacuation route or anything on that Lawrence Road, because considering it's just south of Lawrence Road and to the west of it. And if you look at the actual map there, it looked like it even was going to connect some roads possibly to Lawrence Road there, which would further connect down into some of the other subdivisions, which would eventually give them additional evacuation onto like Cascade Ridge Drive and so on. I don't see that being an issue with the evacuation there. It was a good question, but I think it just being south of that, so it might actually in some cases add to additional evacuation routes.
Yeah, and I'm not sure about this particular project, but typically I'm not with Southeast Lawrence Road may or may not meet current city standards, but and I guess in this case, if we're annexing it, it wouldn't be an issue right now, but when we come in for the development application, we may or may not have to do some improvements on Lawrence Road, which to Councilor, and I'm sorry, Councilor, I think it's Litke. Did I?
Yep, you got it right.
Yeah. Okay. Councilor Litke's point is that typically, if there's an existing roadway adjacent to a new land development or housing development, it's going to be in better shape after the project than before. So to the extent that Lawrence Road needs to be in good shape for evacuation, I can tell you this, it won't be any worse shape than it is now, and it's most likely to be much better as a function of doing the subdivision and land development, that sort of stuff. Councilor Dunsmuir, did that answer your question?
It does. Thank you very much.
Okay, great. So, those are really the items I wanted to address. And frankly, most of those were me tracking what the questions were to staff during the staff's presentation. But at the end of the day, it's as Tracy said it meets the criteria and should be approved, but it's got this twist. And this twist is that, you know, the city has, I think, frankly, by default, which is what Tracy was explaining to you, created a plan that was based on the original airport ownership, not what it currently looks like now. Obviously, that ownership has changed. And so we think it's appropriate to change the designation here to single family residential. And we think that based on what staff has told us in our application, that we've met all of the applicable criteria. I understand the concerns from ODA, but I think we've adequately addressed those both in front of the Planning Commission and our written testimony, and then tonight. So unless there are any other questions, I just want to say that we're supportive of the staff decision, the conditions of approval in that decision, and we would respectfully request that the council approve the application. And to the extent that the applicant is asked to participate in a future planning process for the airport, I can't imagine that we would be opposed to that. But we want to get going on this project now, because you know, there's just, even if we put it on hold, we're going to be in the same situation that we are now, I would guess. So with that, if there are any other questions, I will thank you for your time and encourage you to approve the application.
Okay. Hearing that, are there any more questions from council before we move along? No? Okay, you satisfied all the questions. We appreciate that. Thank you. Are there any speaker request forms at all, or anything, you know?
I
can
don't
see?
see any hands raised at the moment.
Okay.
No hands are being raised.
Oh, great. Does the staff have anything else they'd like to add before we move on? No? Okay.
I just wanted
Go ahead,
to,
Taylor.
I just wanted to confirm or reiterate that I think Garrett was exactly right with his comment about, even if you did table the application, the fact that it was submitted and deemed complete when it was means that the policies we have in place now are what will apply to it. So just confirming that he's right on the nose with that.
Okay, great. Thank you, Taylor. Okay, in that, we will close the public hearing and we will reopen the city council. And I will accept a motion on the floor at this point. Do I have a motion? Joel, I have a motion on the floor. Do I have a second?
Do I need to-
Sorry, can
do I
you
need to
state
title-
the motion?
Yeah, that's it. Do I need to?
Sure, yeah, reread the motion. Do you want it read just like it is right here? On
Is
the-
there, I was looking for a page with a motion. I couldn't find one, so I was just gonna motion that the annexate, that we accept the annexation of application 2022-01 annex -34E, 16, tax lot 1032 as recommended by staff.
Okay, great. We have a motion on the floor. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Paul, is seconding. Okay, I have a first and second. All those, well, you know, in fact, let's do a roll call vote on this, Sadie.
Thank you. Counselor Dunsmuir,
Aye.
Counselor Hughes,
Aye.
Counselor Lidkey,
Yes.
Counselor Strobel,
Yes.
Counselor Tenbush,
Yes.
Mayor Drinkwine.
Yes. Okay. Motion passes. We thank the applicant. We thank everybody. And Katie, you have something else you want to add?
I do just want to add, when we see this subdivision application, just for future, I personally will feel a lot more confident when looking at the subdivision application if there are certain measures taken in the design that are accommodating to the airport. I would really, really, really like to see that in the subdivision application when it comes to the council. Personally, I'd like to see them take steps to mitigate this subdivision's effect that it will have on the airport and vice versa.
I agree. I agree. We definitely need to clarify that in the future. We don't need to be visiting this again. So we thank you for that. Moving right along, we are at council business. I have the second consideration for ordinance 2022-002, an ordinance amending sections 15.08.030, a Board of Appeals of Title 15, Building and Construction of the Estiqueto Municipal Code. So you've heard it.
I so move.
Okay, it's been moved. Do I have a second?
Second.
I have a first and second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Okay, motion passes. Thank you. Okay, second thing on there, we have the 2022 council goals. So I will hand that over to Melanie.
Sure, thank you. This is just, I put together based on the workshop that we held, kind of updating the council goals as far as if there was ones that were complete, pulling them off there. And then adding, I highlighted in yellow the new ones that I added in from the discussion at the council workshop. So I just wanted to present this for hopeful approval, but also give you time to provide feedback if you wanted to add or delete, or if I misinterpreted something. Yes, Councilor Dunsmere.
Katie?
Something that I brought up last year when Denise was still our manager was that I had been contacted by somebody, gosh, like a year or so ago, actually, about having more environmentally friendly policies or sustainability practices actually included in our council goals. Not necessarily that we're going to have a lot of goals directly related to that subject, but it would be really nice for the council to sort of keep environmentally friendly practices as part of our goals, and really working toward a sustainable policies, if that makes any sense. And really, I know that the city is already taking steps to do better when it comes to using less paper or driving more energy efficient vehicles and things like that. And I think that it would be really nice if we could add something in our goals that are related to any kind of environmental or sustainability practices. And that was just something that we talked about doing last year. And I just wanted to kind of throw that out here while we're already talking about the council goals.
Okay, thank you. I'm
No.
not sure how to add that in on the fly, but I completely agree with you. And sometimes I was looking at other cities' goals, and some of them are pretty high level, and I tend to be, a lot of times more boots on the ground. And so I think it's important to add in those overarching goals of sustainability and things maybe specifically that we can do, like some of the specific things you mentioned. So I'm not sure how to add that in on the fly right now. But Councilor Strobel, do you have a suggestion about that?
Yeah,
Or
what
anything?
are we looking to accomplish tonight with this? Are we looking, if we're looking for just maybe a general concurrence that we're all in agreement with how things look right now? And I think Councilor Dunsmere comes up, I think her suggestion is definitely worthwhile. Could you see if there's something out there that we could put in here? And then look to finalize this once we get the new city manager in place at that point. What are thoughts on that?
That sounds good. That sounds good to me. How does everybody else feel about that?
I think it's nice, an overreaching understanding that
Okay.
we'll be conscious of this in the future. And being at the top of the Clackamas, we need to, more than any other person, I think, along the way, be recognizing that. So that was good for you to bring that up, Katie. Thank you.
So there's a general consensus that these are keeping us on track. We can track with these goals, and then I could even bring it back at the next meeting with work on some adding that into the goals perhaps, and then we could wait till the permanent city manager is on board to officially adopt it. Is that kind of what you're thinking?
Yeah, and revisit it and set it up, and then
I'm good with that.
yeah, that's good. I'm liking that.
Okay.
Is that good with you, Kitty? Are you okay with that? Does that sound like okay? Good.
Any other thoughts about that, or would that work fine?
No.
Take this as consensus to keep moving forward on this, and then sometimes we don't actually finalize them until a little bit later anyway, because we kind of modify them a little bit. But so yeah.
Katie's got another question.
I was just gonna say, I've been a part of this council for over 3 years now, and I consider this council goals document as a living document that is constantly changing and constantly living and breathing. And really, it's the same document that we've been working with for over 3 years, but it changes all the time. And I think that change is good, you know, like Maya Angelou put it better than anyone else. Do your best until you know how to do better, and then do better. And that's what this living document really is when we find out ways that we can be better, let's be better and just add it to the document. I love it.
Okay,
All right.
thank you for that feedback. Anybody else?
Anybody else got anything for Melanie? All right.
Okay.
Moving right along, we are at the next citizen and community group comment. Sadie, do I have anybody in the queue?
No hands raised.
No? Okay. It's now time for mayor council reports. So I'll start off with Paul. You're up on my side this time.
Yeah, I just want to thank everyone for the fantastic discussion tonight. The questions and the thoughts that council brought up tonight, I thought were fantastic. I can't say enough about Taylor, the work that she put together to prepare us for this as well too. So I just want to say I'm impressed with the group. Thank you. I thought we all worked well together on this one tonight. I thought it was a very constructive night, even going back to our workshop as well too. Great stuff tonight. Thank you, everyone. And thanks to staff for all their hard work.
All right. Katie, you're next.
Honestly, I have a million things that I would like to say. Probably not all things that I should say. I don't know how many people are aware, but today was the deadline for the petition for the recall against me. If they turned in 214 valid signatures, then it will be going to the ballot for the election in May. That being said, I don't have any news on it. Hopefully the county works quickly and is able to give us some actual news tomorrow. That being said, lots and lots of lessons have been learned in the last 3 months. Lots and lots of lessons. You learn who you can trust and maybe who you can't trust as much. But one of the biggest lessons that I've learned is exactly the reason why I'm going to leave it at this. I don't really want to talk about things that I can't control. I don't really want to play dirty political games. It's not my style. So I'm going to just close with the Mark Twain quote that you don't wrestle in the mud with pigs, because then you both get dirty and the pig likes it. And I just want to say thank you to everybody who's reached out to me in the last 3 months. I'm really, really hoping that we'll have some good news by the end of the day tomorrow, if not by the end of this week. And we can all move forward with our lives and maybe focus on being more kind to each other and have less hate. And that's my hope for all of Estacada moving forward. Thank you. Thank you, staff, for what was a great evening. And thank you, council, for some really invigorating discussion. And I appreciate you all.
Thank you. Okay, Charity.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks for everybody's comments tonight and questions. You guys brought forward some questions I hadn't even thought about, and with that property off Lawrence Road that was a lot. So I appreciate some of you seasoned counselors having a little bit more insight into that and asking some of those tough questions that stuff I hadn't even considered. So that was good. And I'm glad we were able to kind of come to a decision and move forward with that. Anyway, nothing really more to report on my end. I'll have more next week as the school board meets, but just trying to get through a busy season in my life. But and yeah, that's it. I thank everybody for showing up tonight, and thanks, Melanie, for just staying on top of things. You've been really, really awesome at communicating with us lately, and I really appreciate it. You've gone above and beyond. So, and thanks staff for putting everything together very, very nicely like you always do. And yeah, everybody have a great week and weekend.
All right, thank you, Charity. Joel?
Nothing much to say except for thank you everybody for your time tonight. Thank you staff for the hard work, and I've really been appreciative of Melanie reaching out and trying to making sure we understand everything. If there's any questions, that's been a nice change and kind of getting their questions answered ahead of time, and it's just been real nice and real pleasant tonight for the council. Appreciate it.
Great, thank you, Jerry.
As always, thank you, staff. You guys did an amazing job. The packet was clear, very clear. I didn't even have any questions this week, so at least not for staff. Thanks the guys from with that annexation application. There was a lot of good information Taylor put together. Taylor and those guys put all, next to all the pertinent information we needed. There was a few questions we had, but it was all there. I really appreciate that. One thing I do want to request of all of us as we're moving forward with any kind of decisions made up on that Lawrence Road, any kind of developments or anything, that road is terrible. That road, if any of you have been down that road, especially that little hook in the down the gully, that road is absolutely terrible. So if we do any kind of development, if there's any development done, that road needs to be addressed one way or the other. We have to address that road. I believe it's a county road, at least most of it is a county road, but if we're allowing houses to be put back there, that road it's terrible. It's unsafe. It's unsafe for the people that live there now, let alone for putting a whole bunch more houses in there. So we just need to make sure that any developments that we look at moving forward and on that road definitely needs to be addressed. So just keep that in mind as we're looking at those. I appreciate you all, and I guess I'll see all of you tomorrow night at 6.
Yeah. All right, thank you, Jerry. And again, thanks staff tonight. You did a great job, and thank everybody who worked on that whole planning thing. That was immense, quite a bit involved there, and good questions. All of you did a great job. So again, thank you, and have a nice 24 hours until our next meeting. So thank you.